Welcome to The Cow Behind the Barn, a podcast exploring humanity, the world, and the divine as experienced and interpreted by an artist. I'm Kevin Caldwell, a co-founder of the Table Collective. I'm experiencing a growing realization that the question I asked at the outset of episode 2 is merely a step into a vast, mysterious world. Where and when did I begin? It's like a mirror in a mythic novel that a character can walk through and end up in a different universe, or a picture on a wall that suddenly draws a character into its scene, pulling them from a calm, sunlit sitting room into a tiny sailboat on a wild and lonely ocean. The question, where and when did I begin, carries within it assumptions about space, time, and consciousness. Space, the nature of the physical observed world and of places in it. Time, past, present, future. Consciousness, the self, selves, and non-human, seen and unseen. Divine, ? Which is fascinating, inspiring, mysterious, daunting, and overwhelming all at the same time, whatever time is. It's overwhelming because space, time, and consciousness are huge boxes into which we can pack pretty much everything that artists and philosophers and theologians and religious founders and physicists and astronomers and psychologists and others have considered and observed, postulated, experienced, imagined, and tried to describe. And they've been going at it for centuries, for millennia. I'm seeing in fresh ways that as I create each episode, the way that what I've been calling psychic entanglement connects how I see space, time, and consciousness just gets more and more complex. So, to say it as directly as possible, what I currently think, I'm convinced that space, time, and consciousness are all entangled, connected, inseparably linked. It doesn't mean I claim to fully understand any of those three concepts, but I am convinced that the threads of each are woven together into one large tapestry, not three separate ones. As I was bringing episode 4 to a close, I commented, quote, "By embracing our psychic entanglement, I believe we become alive, more aware and awake, and also that in so doing we add something into the entanglement, contributing elements that can heal others, ourselves perhaps, affecting maybe in a healing way the vast entanglement of the cosmos through the tiny winds of our souls." I've really only focused on space so far, by looking at the way places connect us, a place being one item packed into the box that I've labeled space. But along the way, I've had to repeatedly say things like, "We will come back to that," whenever something related to time and the nature of consciousness comes up. There's a lot more to explore about space, and so about places, and the things in places, and how we're entangled with them, and they with us, and so us with us, and so on. I haven't even lifted a corner of the lid on questions about what the universe is, how it got here, where it came from, whether there's a something, quote unquote, that started it, or if a someone was and is involved, and in what way, or even the difference between a something and a someone. I've been paying more attention to the more personal aspects of psychic entanglement. However, at this point, I think this episode will be my final autobiographical reflection on entanglements with places and things. I think so, but I haven't really finished drafting the episode. And since I've already been surprised a few times by turns that my own creative process has taken me, I don't want to be too definitive yet. I had an intuition that I needed to include something about my birth father, Ralph Caldwell, and it would have been a natural spot in the last episode, except that it didn't occur to me then, and later when it did, I sensed I was already pushing against my self-imposed 30-minute limit. I've mentioned that as a teenager, my dad and my grandmother found my grandfather dead on the porch one morning. I never met my grandfather, but I've learned that he was an alcoholic, probably suffering from PTSD following World War II, and that my dad sometimes had to pick him up when they released him from the quote-unquote drunk tank. In the final years of my dad's life, I learned firsthand how much all of that had affected him. As a kid, all I knew was how my dad affected me. And without going into the details, I'll just say that he left quite a mark, not physically, but the psychic bruising ran deep, and the muscles and the tendons and the joints of my soul have never had their full range of motion. My dad loved music. He was an eclectic listener, and no genre was outside of his range. But he was perhaps most deeply moved by folk music, and from at least the early 1960s, he owned a nylon string guitar and was constantly learning songs, right up until his final days. There are two precious things I received from my father. The first was one of those books that you can buy for your father or mother or anyone to fill out, a book full of questions and prompts about their childhood and family memories and early life and dreams, etc. I bought one for him, and he filled it out. And then I read it. And on visits to see him during the final years of his life, we talked about the things he wrote in those pages. The second was his old guitar. The tuning keys were and still are a little wonky, and it doesn't hold its tuning the way it should. But on the other hand, now that it's about 60 years old, it has aged and mellowed. As did my father, though I think in this regard the guitar was a little ahead of him, maybe trying to lead him by the hand. There's no way to calculate how many seconds and minutes and hours that guitar was cradled in his arms, held in his hands, touched by his fingers, vibrating with the sound of his somewhat gravelly voice as he sang the songs of Bob Dylan and Joan Baez, John Prine, Johnny Cash, and many, many more obscure artists as well. One day, a few years ago, I picked up that guitar on a sort of random whim. I cradled it in my arms, held it in my hands, touched it with my fingers, and to my amazement, the guitar made music. I say it that way on purpose. Yes, I was playing it. I'm not claiming I was channeling something, but at the same time, it felt like the guitar was making the music. It just happened. It emerged. And so I immediately got my laptop and did a very quick single-take recording of the basic piece. Later, I embellished it with other tracks, but I never redid that first take. And you can hear some mistakes if you listen close, and you can feel where my tempo changes here and there because I was just playing without a click track or a metronome. I'm just going to play it here before I say anything more. My father's guitar. Now, I don't know what you might have experienced, but what I felt, what I sensed in the music that the guitar was making, was healing. I can't prove this, of course, but I experienced that song as my psychic entanglement with my father's healing, a healing I know he did not experience during his lifetime, but which I think was happening as he played that guitar, as the music he played on it, and so the music that played in him worked its own psychic butterfly effects deep within. And I believe that the same effects worked in and through me years later on that day when I picked it up and cradled it in my arms, worked in me for my healing, and I believe was contributing to his healing. Yes, after his death. An old guitar, like the old truck near Omaha in a prior episode, is a thing in a place. But things and places and people are all entangled. I'm aware that not all entanglement heals, but that experience with the guitar did bring healing, I think, both for me and for my father. And maybe the music from it offers a healing experience for you in our entangled connection here. As part of this final, I think, autobiographical reflection on places, I feel like I have to go to Bakersfield. I moved there in the early 1960s when my mother left my father. She got a job and remarried. They had a son who died when he was 3 years old. They adopted a brother and sister. I left Bakersfield after high school, but have in different seasons of life returned there multiple times to live, in between living in Los Angeles, California, and Uganda, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and parts of Asia. Raised a family there, at least during the final years of launching my kids out into the wild world. Bakersfield is entangled with me as an individual, and of course with many other people and events. I wrote a song about that. When I began the song, I imagined it as a story song, a personal song, my story. But as the song developed, it told another story too, a more cosmic, entangled story about Bakersfield as a personified place, as a being. This is a homemade recording, though there is a version out there streaming, and as I write this, I'm re-recording a new version of it as well. So yes, it's out there, but here it is in my do-it-yourself take. I'll add a few comments after the song, Bakersfield.
Came here in the 60s when my family blew apart. Mom found a job and a place to live, made us a new start. I grew up on your burning streets, a splinter in my heart. Bakersfield. looking down from panorama, oil fields melting in the sun. The fog rolled in so thick sometimes they closed all our schools down. I played like any other kid, my soul had come undone. Bakersfield, in Chrysler with the man you gave Mom and I to start new lives. The night my baby brother died, the only time I saw him cry. We took in 2 new foster kids, together we were 5. Bakersfield, I see Colonel Baker standing on the banks along the Kern, waiting there for travelers who disappeared and won't return. Watches water that ain't there no more, flows around a turn. Bakersfield. Well, Buck and Merle made music here, the Bakersfield sound channeled all the souls born in the dust of the Oklahoma ground. They gave words to the hearts of redneck men when words could not be found. Bakersfield. The class of 1976, Bakersfield High. I left for Long Beach City, thought I'd left you all behind. Like everyone I know from here, I came back time after time to Bakersfield. Well, sometimes things turn out in ways, and for reasons not quite clear, we lived all around the world. You were always near, and you're buried in my daughter's hearts, though they're miles away from here. Bakersfield. On a clear day I can see the South Sierra standing proud, calling out to all who live down here to leave behind the crowds. We're stuck down here on Rosedale in our shiny metal shrouds. Bakersfield. Maybe in your future you'll turn back to the dust that blew here from Oklahoma, with the oil fields and the rust. People driving up the 5 won't notice you were lost. Bakersfield. Or maybe all those travelers will line up here again, drink the mountain water that will flow back to the Kern. Colonel and Buck and Merle, the rest of us return to Bakersfield. Seems like everyone who leaves you someday will return. Bakersfield.
In the song, Bakersfield becomes a person. It's the you of the song. There's lines like, the man you gave, you were always near, maybe in your future. The city of Bakersfield becomes almost a mystical reality, a place connecting Colonel Baker and Buck Owens and Merle Haggard and travelers from the past and possible travelers in the future. And so in many ways, my instrumental piece, Father's Guitar, and the song Bakersfield both serve to connect the dots of the mystery of space, time, and consciousness. I wasn't really thinking of all that on purpose, or you might say I was not conscious of it, but it seems to me that consciousness was at work as I created the songs. Was that the subconscious? Collective consciousness? Divine consciousness? You can probably guess what I'm about to say. We will come back to that later. But I can't repeat that I'm convinced there is a psychic entanglement connecting space and time and consciousness, which prompts me to close this episode with a poem. In the poem, I use the terms ecstasy and ecstatic. Ecstasy is a state of being, and I use ecstatic here not descriptively, like he was ecstatic, but substantively as a noun, and so the ecstatic, as if it's a thing. In the poem, both terms refer to whatever or whoever it is that entangles everything. Touch the ecstatic. Inside that sway of grass and wind, this pulse, dull eyes, a dusty rose, there is something ecstatic. I cannot say, but I know, believe. More honest, I only want to live if I can believe and touch. Ecstasy is chaos dancing. Electrons, protons, morons, skeletons, put-ons, on and on, colliding on pulsing universe mystic strobe light floors, loved on. Ecstasy is a God's kiss, pressed on the first fleshy mouth, divine, moist, intimate breath through parted lips. Eyelids flicker open, embrace the gaze of God, entwined lovers in the afterglow, in a raw green world, satiated. Ecstasy is me beside myself, seeing inside myself, from outside myself, myself as myself, my own eyes, seeing me for the first time, tender. Ecstasy is joy unbridled, lustrous lust, throbbing, unholy godliness, walking naked, carnal, warm in the glow of Eden, wiping juice from giddy lips with the back of a wanton hand, unashamed. Loved on, satiated, tender, unashamed, joy unbridled, beside myself, a God's kiss, chaos dancing. I touch, am touched, ecstatic. As I reflect on this episode and prior episodes, I can see that I'm beginning to touch on whether something or a someone is at work in our prehistory, in our psychic history, in the psychic entanglement that I refer to. I'm planning to stay in the space box, the consideration of the nature of, nature, but I'm going to leave the autobiographical path, to mix metaphors. I mean, boxes don't have paths. It will be a little tricky to talk about space without talking about consciousness, and whether there's a big C at the beginning of that word or not. But I'll try. So in the next episode, I'll begin from how some of the great religious heritages have understood the nature of the world and whether it is what we think it is or not. Until next time.